So welcome you all. In my class for today's, I'm going to discuss about the very important conventions that is pertaining to environmental law in your law paper. So when you take environmental law in your law paper, first thing we have to divide it into three major things. Another like when most of the questions will be concentrated upon these three major areas. One is international conventions, which is we'll be discussing in this video. And the next one is the constitutional framework or other legislations pertaining to India. Third is the judiciary and principles of environmental law, that is doctrines under the environmental law. So in my video, the first video, we are going to check about the international conventions. For the sake of convenience, I've given these international conventions in the chronological order. So the first convention that we are going to see is the Ramsar Convention. So this Ramsar Convention, it is related to the wetland, which is also known as the Convention on the Wetlands. This was signed in the year 1971 and this came into the force in the year 1975. And this was signed in the place called Ramsar, which is located at the Hiran. So when we take the meaning of wetland, it means of the areas of a marsh or water, or whether it can be natural or artificial. The definition of the marshland or of the wetland has been given in the Ramsar Convention. And it also means that any kind of water that is flowing, brackish or salt, but that should not exceed 6 meters of the depth. So this Ramsar Convention was also adopted by India in the year 1981, particularly 1st February 1981. And there are nearly 75 Ramsar sites in India. February 2nd, it is celebrated as the International Wetlands Day. One of the most important thing about this Ramsar Convention is the Montreux Record. So this Montreux Record is a register of the wetland site on the list of the wetlands of international importance. For example, if there is any wetland, which is like, if you take the Chilka Lake of our India country, it has been given an international importance. It has comes under the list of wetlands of international importance, and that would be placed under the Montreux Record. So that more importance or priority would be given to that particular wetland. So there are 6 international organizations that comes under this Ramsar Convention, which is BirdLife International, IUCN, Wetlands International, WWF, International Water Management Institute, and Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust. So these are the important points with regard to the Ramsar Convention. So mostly they will ask you questions like match the following. That is, one side they would have given you the conventions, and on the other side the year in which it was adopted or when it came into force. So for that point, if you take the Ramsar Convention, it was signed in the year 1971 and it came during the 1970. It came into force during 1975. Another point of question which would be asked for the purpose of the convention. So for example, this Ramsar Convention came into force with regard to the Convention on the Wetlands. It had a specific purpose to protect and preserve the wetlands. So that is another point where they can put in the match the following. That is the name of the convention on the one side and the purpose for which it was enacted. And another point of like where they could possibly there will be a question is in which year it was adopted by the India. So from this thing we'll understand from this Ramsar Convention came into force in 1971 and it was adopted by India in 1981, and there are 75 Ramsar sites in India. So moving on to the next convention is the Stockholm Declaration of 1972. This is very important conference which took place in the Stockholm during 1972. This is one of the first world conference to make the environment a major issue. Environment was considered as a major issue, and this was one of the conference, one first of kind, where it was completely given for the protection and preservation of the environment. So it adopted various principles for the sound management of the environment. The Stockholm Declaration, mainly, that was adopted in the year 1972. It contained around 26 principles. It contained around 26 principles, and also one of the major result of this Stockholm conference was the creation of the United Nations Environment Program. So the United Nations Environment Program was created on the basis of this Stockholm Conference. Another important thing is Stockholm Declaration 1972. So out of Stockholm Conference 1972, there are two outcomes. One is the creation of the United Nations Environment Program. Another one is Stockholm Declaration 1972. There are 26 principles in that Stockholm Declaration. So there are 5 important principles where they have repeatedly asked questions during the UGC NET exam. The first one is the principle 1, that is right to environment. Man as a fundamental right to freedom, equality, conditions of life, an environment of a quality that permits a life of dignity and well-being. That is, every individual, as every man, has the right to protect the environment, and also he has to he has right to environment. Right to life includes the right to dignity also, right to protect the environment also. Another important principle that has been given is the principle 6, that is the discharge of toxic substances or other substances and the release of heat in such quantities or concentrations as to exceed the capacity of the environment to render them harmless must be halted. That is, if there is going to be any perpetual damage or any kind of more damage to the environment or harm to the environment by way of discharging of any toxic substances or any other substances which would exceed and that would lead to the deterioration of the environment, means that should not be done. That is the pollution control, which is given under the principle 6. And then principle 12 talks about the resources should be made available to preserve the environment and improve the environment. This is what environment protection education, that more resources should be given or it should be made available which should preserve and improve the environment. Then another important principle is principle 22, that is development of international law. So the state should cooperate, that whoever party to this declaration, they should cooperate and develop further international law with regarding to the liability and compensation for the victims of pollution and other environmental damage. So there should be cooperation among the states to develop the international law pertaining to regarding the liability and compensation for the victims of the pollution and other environmental damage. The last important principle is international cooperation. That is, there should be a cooperation and cooperative spirit by all the countries. It can be a big or small or on equal footing to protect and improve the condition of the environment. These are the important principles or repeated PYQ with regard to the Stockholm Declaration of 1972. So first we saw Ramsar Convention. Then we saw Stockholm Declaration, which is an outcome of a United Nations Conference on the human environment, which took place in the place called Stockholm. And another outcome of this particular conference is the United Nations Environment Program. The next convention we have is Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna CITES, which was signed in the year 1973 and it came into the force in the year 1975. So it is an international agreement. This CITES is an international agreement between governments and it was entered into the force in the year 1975. This convention is also known as Washington Convention. What is it? This convention is also known as Washington Convention, and we have also adopted this convention in the year 1976. So this is one such convention, one such treaty which to ensure that international trade in plants and animals does not threaten the survival in the wild. This, as I mentioned earlier, this particular convention is only related to the international trade of the species of wild fauna and flora. So they have 3 appendixes which confers a different level of regulations, and it requires permits or certificates. So there is Appendix 1, which deals with the species that threatened with extinction and provides the greatest level of protection. And Appendix 2, although they are not currently not threatened with extinction, may become so. So if there is no trade controls, it may become extincted, even though if they are not currently not in the list of the extinction. And then we have 3rd appendix, where for which a range country has other parties to help in controlling the international trade. That is why there are 3 appendixes to help this function of this convention of the CITES 1973. This is also known as the Washington Convention. Then we have the Convention on Migratory Species of 1979. This convention is also known as the Bonn Convention. So this convention, basically, this aims to conserve the terrestrial, aquatic, and avian migratory species throughout the range. So basically, this convention is to protect the migratory species of wild animals and their habitats. So this is an intergovernmental treaty, and it has been concluded by the United Nations Environment Program by concerning with the conservation of wildlife and habitats on a global scale. So coming to this convention, this was adopted in the year 1979, and it came into the force in the year 1983, and we, India, have ratified it in the year 1983. To accord with this, we have lot of policies like marine turtle policy, Project Snow Leopard, Dugang Conservation Reserve, and Wildlife Protection Act, our Act of 1972, have included in a Schedule 1 of the Act. If you say, there'll be it deals with the rare and endangered species of birds, including the migratory birds, are included in the Schedule 1 of the Act, which includes highest degree of the protection. And also stringent punishments of after becoming party to this act, that we have incorporated stringent punishments into our act with regard to the violations of the provisions of the act. So this is with regard to the Convention on Migratory Species 1979, which came into the force in the year 1983. Then we have Nairobi Declaration of 1982. This came into the force in the year 18th May 1982. This is to the celebration of the 10th anniversary of the Stockholm, because Stockholm Declaration we have it in the 1972, and this came in the year 1982. So Nairobi Declaration, it is a long-term environmental plans for ensuring sustainable development. This declaration gave plans for a long term for ensuring with regard to the sustainable development. Then we have Vienna Convention of 1985. This convention was pertaining to the especially for the protection of the ozone layer. This came we signed in the year 1985. We have protocols to this convention also, and this was universally ratified by 16th September 2009. So this first, what is ozone layer? If you take, it is like a layer in the Earth's stratosphere that contains high levels of ozone. So this layer, basically what it does, it protects the sun, it protects the Earth from the sun's harmful UV radiation. But in case if this ozone layer is absent, there will be like millions of people would be affected by skin diseases, like including cancer and weakened immune systems, and there will be climate change, all the things. So it also would affect the environment adversely, like leading to the decreased productivity, and also it will cause a very adverse effect on the fauna also. Now, this what is ozone layer? This is depleting because of the emission of certain chemical compounds. So the chemical compounds that cause ozone layer depletion are called as a ozone depleting substances. For example of ozone depleting substances, commonly we all know what that is chlorofluorocarbons, hydrofluorocarbons, carbon tetrachloride, methyl chloroform, like halogens. All these are the common ozone depleting substances that we all know. So chlorofluorocarbons are the most abundant ozone depleting substances. So these ozone depleting substances are also, they are called as the greenhouse gases because they have a very long life as well. So this particular convention, that is Vienna Convention of 1985, was with regard to the protection of the ozone layer. So this has one main protocol, that is Montreal Protocol, like substances that deplete, with regard to substances that deplete the ozone layer. And we have also become party to this Vienna Convention in the year 1991. And 16th September is celebrated as the International Day for the preservation of the ozone layer. This is with regard to the Vienna Convention of 1985. Then we have Montreal Protocol 1987. So this is a protocol to the Vienna Convention of 1985. So this protocol, it actually sets targets for what? For reducing the consumption. For the reducing the consumption of ozone depleting substances and production of a range of ozone depleting substances. Consumption and production of a range of ozone depleting substances. We have adopted this Montreal Protocol in the year 1992. This ozone depleting, by abiding to this protocol, we have also our own rules under our environmental regime, that is ozone depleting substances rules 2000. In the year 2000, we have enacted one rules, ozone depleting substances regulation and control rules 2000. So this protocol, they have undergone 9 amendments or revisions. So one such famous amendment is the Kigali Amendment of 8th Amendment, and which will be seen in a later part of my video. And the governance body for this protocol is the meeting of the parties, that is the conference of the parties. And technical support is like given by the open-ended working group, and they meet once every year. So their headquarters is also based at the headquarters of the UN Environment Program, that is at the Nairobi. Then we have Brundtland Report 1987. This is one such report, first report, where the sustainable development was defined. This particular report or a commission is also called, this particular report is also called as the World Commission on the Environment and Development or Common Future. So the definition that has been given by this Brundtland report is a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future and generations to meet their own needs. So the sustainable development means that there can be a development to meet the needs of the present, but that development should not compromise the ability of the future generation. That is, they should not damage the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs. That is what the definition of the sustainable development that was given in the Brundtland report of 1987. That is, it is a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Then we have United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, which happened in the year 1992, which is also known as the Earth Summit 1992. So basically, there are two conferences. One is Stockholm Conference, which took place in the year 1972. Another one is this Rio Conference, that is 1992. This took place in the Rio de Janeiro. So this is also known as the Rio Conference, which spoke detailed information in regard to the environment conservation and the development. This Rio Summit is also known as the Earth Summit of 1992. There was like one tricky question in the last previous year question paper, where they were asked in which under which principle the principle of precautionary principle and polluter pays principle have been incorporated under various principles. The right answer was like principle 16 of the Rio Declaration. So they had options like principle 16 of Rio Declaration, principle 15 of Earth Summit, principle 16 of Stockholm Declaration, like that. So like they had two options of the same conference names. So we have to be very careful, because Earth Summit and the Rio Declaration are the same. And we have to be very careful with regard to the year 1992. So the important outcomes of this Rio conference is the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, Agenda 21, and Forest Principles. So for Stockholm Conference, the important outcomes were the Stockholm Declaration and creation of United Nations Environment Program. And for Rio Conference, the important outcome was Rio Declaration, Agenda 21, and the Forest Principles. These are the important outcomes of the Rio Declarations. Now, it has 27 principles. So, the important principles are given under the Principle 3, Principle 15, and Principle 16. The first principle, where these are very important principles, there are 27 principles, but these are the very important principles. Principle 3 is with regard to the intergenerational equity. That is the concept of sustainable development. That is, the right to development must be fulfilled so as to equitably meet developmental and environmental needs of present and future generations. So the development should be done in such a way that it meets the development and environmental needs of the present and the future generations. And then very important principles like polluter pays principle and precautionary principle are given only under the Rio Declaration, which is under principle 15. So the principle 15 lays on the precautionary approach shall be widely applied according to their capabilities by the states. That is, the states as to whatever they're capable of, in such a way they should apply the precautionary approach from the when there is any threat of serious or irreversible damage to the environmental degradation. Then another important principle is the polluter-based principle. Polluter-based principle is the principle like whoever done the pollution should bear the cost of pollution. Like whoever created the pollution is responsible to bear the cost of pollution by keeping in mind with regard to the public interest, and this should not cause any damage to the international trade and the investment. So there are three important principles: Principle 3, Principle 15, and Principle 16. And another important outcome is the Agenda 21. This Agenda 21 is a very comprehensive action plan for the UN organization and government and the significant groups. The 21, it denotes the number of 21st century. That is the agenda for the 21st century. And then we have the forest principles. This forest principle is like a non-binding authoritative statement which regard to the principles of the all types of forests for their management, conservation, and their sustainable use. So this forest principle, it contains lot of recommendations for the conservation and sustainable development of the forestry, and it is not binding. So we have this Rio conference. There are three important outcomes: Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, Agenda 21, Forest Principles. This Rio Declaration, we have learned about three important principles for the exam point of view. That is Principle 3, Principle 15, and Principle 16. Then we have Agenda 21. It has 21 chapters. And then we have Rio Earth Summit, that 1992 Forest Principles. Next, another important convention is the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, 1992. This convention was signed in the year 1992 in the Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. So this treaty mainly sets limits with regard to the greenhouse gas emissions in the countries, but they are not binding, and there are also no enforcement mechanisms either. But further, there have been lot of agreements, like lot of updates where they have like given legally binding emission limits on the countries. So they would meet annually in the Conference of Parties to review the progress under the convention. Two important protocols or updates with regard to this Framework Convention on Climate Change is the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. So we have like important conferences of parties where they have given like a lot of revisions and amendments to giving more importance to the climate change. First such conference was in 1995. It took place in the year Berlin. Then we have Conference of Parties 3. This is a Kyoto year only the Kyoto Protocol came into force. So this Kyoto Protocol is a legally binding document which binds all the developed countries to emission reduction targets. Then we have 2002 COP8, which took place in our country, where a particular declaration with regard to the emission reduction target was signed, known as Delhi Declaration. Then in 2007, it is COP13, which took place in Bali. Then 2010, we have COP16, Cancun. Then we have 2011, COP17, Durban. 2015, we have COP21, Paris. So there's one possible question from this particular area where they would have, like in 2018 or 19, they have asked where the Conference of Parties years would be given on one side of the match the following, and the place where it occurred, it would have been given under the other side of the parties, and only the question will be based upon only on the important conferences of parties. That's why I've given mentioned about only the important conference of parties. And then we have 2016 to COP22, which launched the Marrakech Partnership for the Climate Action. COP23 2017, which took place in Bonn. COP24, we have Katowice 2018. COP25, which took place in Spain 2019. COP26 Glasgow 2021. Last year it took place in Egypt, and 2020 COP28 is set to take place in Dubai. They've planned to do it in Dubai. So these are the important a conference of parties with regard to the United Nations Framework Convention on the Climate Change. Among these, there are three important things. One is 1997 Kyoto Protocol. Then we have 2015-21 Paris Agreement. And then we have 2016-22, which launched the Marrakech Partnership for the Climate Action. So this is with regard to the United Nations Framework Convention on the Climate Change. So we have the Professor Academy has opened their admissions for UGC NET 2024. And you can contact the number that is given on your screen for further details. And very all the best for your upcoming examination in the December 2023. Do well, prepare well, like concentrate and prepare, revise well, learn, like don't panic. It will be very easy paper. You can all can clear it. So very all the best to everyone. Thank you.